Good evening. Tonight we'll be looking at the issue of national development in a very broad context. We're all aware of the difficult economic circumstances this nation was in over a decade ago, and we will agree that a lot of things have changed. This country has moved forward in many ways, but indeed there are other areas where there's still a lot to be done. Politicians and experts in the field of national development have met on numerous occasions. Not too long ago they were brainstorming, if you like, at Ampofo on the way forward. These are some of the issues we'll be looking at tonight. We'll be looking at where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going. But before we even begin, we must take a commercial break.
No question. You can't beat club. An outstanding year.
Relax with club. Enjoy its creamy, natural food. For me, club's just right.
My choice. Nothing compares. Ladies, join the club.
Beer the Nuana Club.
When we think of club, dig it.
Outstanding.
Club, it's good to be number one.
Our guest tonight is an eminent Ghanaian economist and banker, a man with a very varied background, great experience. A man who's worked with the United Nations, has worked with the Ministry of Finance, has worked even before as the governor of the Bank of Ghana. He's a man that recently delivered a lecture to the Ghana Association of Consultants. He delivered an interesting paper which he titled National Development at the Crossroads, The Way Forward. We thought that perhaps that served as the basis for this interview, but even more so, Mr. Alex Ashiabor will be touching on a lot of other broadly related issues. Mr. Ashiabor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Sir, before we even begin, I found very interesting that the way you titled your paper, National Development at the Crossroads, The Way Forward. What do you mean by crossroads?
Well, we are at the crossroads in the sense that we have had a number of false starts, as you know, and we now seem to be charting a new path for ourselves. This path seems to have held very well, and we are in fact at the point where we must take certain steps which will either lead us forward or, if we slip again, could create problems.
So you think that we have gone through a process of economic recovery, are still going through one, but have reached a critical stage?
Exactly.
Why do you consider this moment critical?
This moment is critical in many respects. First, from the economic point of view, you know, we've had this very strong program on recovery, which has, you might say, cleared the undergrowth or removed the obstacles in the way of our economic growth. We have done a lot to remove things like controls, exchange controls, import and trade controls, and liberalize the economy generally. But then we now seem to, and we've brought down inflation, as you recall, inflation was at one point 123%. Now the latest figures that we have are in the 30s, between 30 and 40 annual average. That is a significant improvement. But with inflation at 30, 40%, you can't do very much. We need to push forward. So this is one area where we are at crossroads.
So you have singled out inflation.
Yes.
I mean, you mentioned a number of factors, but it's obvious that you put a special emphasis on inflation. And it's not too surprising. We see that in the press as well. Why is it so difficult to tackle inflation? What are some of the factors that make it difficult?
Well, general experience points out that it is easier to bring inflation down from the 3-digit level to the 2-digit levels. But moving below the 2-digit level is difficult.
That's the real challenge.
Yes, the curve seems to flatten out and then the thing becomes very sticky. But that is not your question. Your question is why is it so sticky? The problem is that we've reached a stage where there are a number of commitments which government has to meet. Some of them are in fact due to the constitutional requirements. Some of them are just, you know, the level of expenditures that the government has to make. Basically, the problem that we have here with inflation is that it's a problem of fiscal balance. Government expenditure is rather high, and that is creating money supply which is much more than the Bank of Ghana can mop up. And this is what is creating the problem. As you know, inflation is generally described as too much money chasing too few goods. That is the simple explanation. And the source of that too much money seems to be from the fiscal imbalance, that is the budget deficits.
Sounds like the solution is simple then. The government shouldn't spend more money.
Well, it's as they say, it's easier said than done. As I said...
Is it also possible, sorry to interrupt you there, so that it's even more difficult also when you have a political environment that requires elections and so on? Is it?
Yes, certainly.
One would expect that governments world over do that. In the election year, there's always a bit of a difference. But I believe that the current government has said that would not even happen, even though there are elections this year.
Yes, I think we have to be sincere that this phenomenon is not peculiar to this government or to this country.
That's right.
All governments find it difficult to rein in inflation or to cut down expenditure on the eve of elections. Now, what is encouraging in this particular situation is that, curiously, the government seems to be more aware of the need to control inflation. So one would expect that they would probably try to contain the situation rather than, you know, unleash new forces of expansion.
Yes.
This is what my opinion would be.
But you generally think that perhaps inflation is the single most important thing to fight today?
Yes. Oh, yes. Just in the same way that controls were the single most important obstacle in the 80s, inflation is now the most important obstacle. I don't know if you'd like me to expand on that a little bit.
We'll come to that in a minute, sir, but first of all, I'd like to take a look at some of the issues you raised in terms of how to move this nation forward. Okay. We've just spoken about inflation, but you also talk about the need to structure policies in the national context. What does that mean?
Well, I've always been concerned about the way we relate to the demands of international cooperation. For instance, I mean, we talk about homegrown policies in terms of the structural adjustment. That means that the policies which we are implementing with the support of the World Bank and the IMF are supposed to be formulated by ourselves.
You don't think that's the case?
Yes, that is the case, but it does not have enough national content, in the sense that we formulate these policies as if we're just so anxious to be good boys internationally. I don't think we give enough emphasis to what is good for us here in Ghana. I mean, we live here. We have to look after ourselves first.
We know our reality.
Exactly. I don't know whether you would like me to give some examples.
I would. Give an example of that.
Take, for instance, I mean, this question of liberalization. I think that I don't want to be misunderstood, but liberalization is good, is absolutely essential. But the open-ended manner in which we are doing it is not done anywhere. I mean, You have people selling red wine in the streets in the sunlight, in the sun. There is no control about the quality of the goods that are brought in. The stories of, goods which have long expiry dates. The international laws, that is the World Trade Organization laws, now World Trade, it used to be GATT, they allow for this sort of things. They allow every country to control imports in the national interest. I don't think we are very conscious of this.
But let me go around it. You say that, but isn't that the responsibility of the institutions to check that, customs and so on? I mean, because I would have thought that even if a government insists on it and says we're not going to just crazily liberalize, you will always have business people that want to dump, for example, expired goods on you. And so therefore, perhaps it's more the responsibility of the enforcement organizations.
Well, the consciousness has to be there first of all. The negotiators have to be, aware of it. As you know, I've worked in the UN and I've been involved in international negotiations on commodities, and I know that our people, not only Ghana, but most African nations, are not very conscious of the need to protect the national interests in negotiations, and that concerns me.
That's what you mean by us getting involved in whatever policies are packaged for our development.
Exactly.
That's what you mean. Mr. Ashiabor, I'm moving very quickly on to a lot of, because you raised a lot of issues, and I remember you raised the issue of the need to subsidize agriculture, and that's a very interesting thing, talking about agriculture. There are many people here that believe that one of the key ways to move forward is for us to relook completely our agricultural policy. So, could you tell us really, in a few words, what you think we ought to do to agriculture?
Well, I feel very strongly that we should find ways to subsidize agriculture. I mean production, not consumption. We should find ways of subsidizing those who are out there in the field, in the mud, in the rain, digging and producing the food that we need. For a number of reasons. Nobody in the world does agriculture without support. This, in fact, is very relevant to the earlier question. You see, we are told by the international community when we deal with, don't subsidize, don't subsidize. But we know that the US, Japan, everywhere, the EU, they all subsidize their agriculture.
So why did they tell us not to subsidize?
Well, you see, to be fair, it's a difficult thing to do. And if you don't do it carefully, you could waste a lot of resources. That is the charitable side of it.
Yes.
But the realistic side of it is that they have a lot of agricultural surplus to dispose of. Yes. And perhaps if we were self-sufficient in agriculture, what would the American wheat farmer do? What would whoever, the sugar people, wherever, do? So this is the problem. This is again the question of national interest. It's not altogether altruistic, this advice that we get from these people. So we have to be conscious of it and not necessarily be confrontational, but just to protect our national interests.
You think we must subsidize agriculture?
Yes.
Is this production on a broad scale, or are you into this selective, sir, I was going to say into this selective subsidy business? Because this is an issue that we've been forwards and backwards with for some time. I mean, the rice farmers at the the Volta region, for example, I recall visiting them on numerous occasions, and they complained a lot about that, then there was the argument from government at the time that you didn't want to encourage inefficiency and so on, and you would rather that they were competitive and so on. So what kind of subsidy are you talking about? Are you, as a policy, are you saying for production we should subsidize? Are you saying we should be selective? On what criteria should we select? That sort of thing.
Well, this is a general problem with subsidies. You have to be you have to plan the thing very well. But for instance, if I say subsidize agriculture, I'm talking about subsidized food production. Now, when we all travel in Europe, we admire the fields, how nicely they are laid out and so on. It takes a lot of money to clear the land, to remove the stumps, to level the fields and so on. I mean, which farmer is going to have the money to do 50, 25 acres of the kind of fields that we have in Europe, that we see in Europe, which we all admire? And unless they are subsidized, in the preparation of the land, you cannot develop acreage. I mean, if, for instance, you said, look, for every acre that you develop, we will subsidize you maybe 20% of the cost or something. This could encourage farmers to develop more acreage. This is the sort of thing that I am talking about, and we should be able to find the resources to do that. I like to say that in that connection, you see, we talked about inflation. What we call the basket of things that go into the cost of living, 40% of that is food. So if we are able to bring down the price of food, we should be able to
obviously have an impact on inflation.
To have an impact on inflation.
Yes, we will come to that in a moment. So
yeah.
we'll come to that.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll be talking to Dr. Ashiabor about some other issues in terms of the way forward. He talks about the need to restructure our trade policies and also to apply discrete policies to encourage sectors with potential. And from a very interesting angle, he also talks about the need to check what he calls budding indiscipline in society.
No question. You can't beat club an outstanding year.
Relax with club. Enjoy its creamy, natural food. For me, club's just right.
My choice. Nothing compares. Ladies, join the club.
Beer the Nuana Club.
What we think of club? Drink it!
Outstanding.
Club, it's good to be number one.
Mr. Ashiabor, you did raise a number of other issues, as I just said, and I'd like us to move on. You also talked about the need to fine-tune our trade policies. What exactly were you driving at?
Well, by that, I mean we should ensure that the open-ended manner in which we trade with the external world should reflect also our own needs. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which you can do this. I mean, for instance, the European community, they allow in fruits and vegetables into Europe when they are off-season in Europe. It's not, you can't just go and start selling your tomatoes. You've heard about tomato wars in Spain,
yeah.
Fish wars between the Canadians and the Spaniards. What is it all about? It's about trade, you see. So it isn't as if, it's as free as it sounds. In fact, there's a whole book written by a professional colleague of yours, a journalist, which says it's titled, the myth of free trade or something like that, So we need to look at some of these things. There are things called phytosanitary provisions. For instance, if you decide to export mangoes into the US or wherever, or apples, if the US authorities don't want, they start giving you a problem. They say, we want to know the kind of chemicals that you use to spray the thing. They will give you chemicals which you can't possibly use.
So what can we do about a thing like this? Imagine that.
Well, first thing is to be conscious of it.
Yes.
And then to be able to fight it. Why is it that we can't export bananas to Europe? Why does the Minister of Agriculture has to be begging the EU for I don't know how many years now? Now I hear we are going to get it. 20,000 tons or 50,000 tons of bananas into Europe. Is that what is going to kill the European banana trade? In fact, they don't produce bananas, but they have linkages with the ex-colonies and so on, and they don't want us to come in.
Sounds like being part of a global economy is rather making life more difficult.
Well, you know, it's all linked up with politics and domestic politics, employment for your people. I mean, if you allow Ghanaian bananas to come in, then the people who are producing bananas in Martinique are unemployed. There's pressure on the French for foreign aid, so the French will block it so that they can sleep easy. You see, these are issues we have to be conscious of. I'm just trying to raise consciousness first, and then later on we decide what to do about it.
But even more so, besides raising consciousness, in terms of having to tackle it, you know, because it seems to me like the whole theme of the unjust, if you like, world economic order. Do you feel that perhaps one long-term approach to it is for third world countries to trade more amongst themselves? North, south, sort of?
Yes, certainly.
I mean, south-south rather in this context. You think that's the way forward?
Yes, that is.
But you agree that the structures for that are not really in place?
No, that is also true, that the structures for that are not really in place. Yes.
Sounds difficult. Let's look at something else that you raised. I remember that you talked also about applying discrete policies, you say, to encourage sectors with potential.
Yes.
Sectors with potential.
Yes.
This is some selective support?
Yes, selective support to sectors with potential. You see, for instance, I mean, we all admire the so-called tigers of the Southeast. I mean, the people, for instance, if you take Korea shipbuilding or heavy engineering industry did not just spring up. It was supported by government. The government decided that we are going to go into heavy engineering, and they gave support to the shipbuilding industry. Then, of course, it has to be a time-bound thing. You can't do it, you know, indefinitely.
Yes.
And also, it has to be free of political patronage. You don't select an industry because it is, you know, part of your party or the owner of the thing belongs to your party.
Yes.
You select the thing on the basis of efficiency. Also, you do it on an industry-wide basis rather than, you know, specific firms. So you select, for instance, I mean, here there's no reason why we cannot produce things like, you know, radios or TVs on a wide scale. I can see that coming with the free zone and so on. But we can target certain light engineering industries which the government can support. I don't see why we cannot do that. But
this is all in the area of manufacturing?
Yes, this is all in the area of manufacturing. This is all in the area of manufacturing. I mean, a study has to be made as to which areas there is potential for competitiveness, for us to be competitive internationally, and just go for it.
But you have Mr. Ashiabor, to your mind, there are specific areas that you think show potential?
Well, you know, our people are very ingenious. So I can see them doing very well in light engineering, in electronics. Why should we be buying, you know, these radios from Japan and so on? I mean, there are people here, you put 10 or 20 of them in a place and give them the equipment, they can produce any radio that you want, you know. So why should we be importing such things? So light electronics, light engineering, textiles, we can do a lot in those areas to start with.
And be competitive.
And be competitive, yes.
Yes, yes.
And food processing, for instance.
Yes. What sort of relationship do you see between agriculture and industry? I mean, what I mean is, do you think we should be focusing more on one than the other?
Well, agriculture should provide the base for industry. So, I mean, first of all, I mean, the agriculture should produce the raw materials for the food industries, even for some of the other industries like furniture, woodwork, and even in the case of agriculture-related areas, like once you have agriculture booming, you can go into fertilizers and you can go into chemical industries. We have a lot of salt here, which can be, you know, processed. And I agree with you that agriculture should, you know, feed feed industry. But for other things, for the light industries that I'm talking about, you don't really need much.
How are you going to do that, sir? How are you going to do that with all this talk about export more, export more? Do you, first of all, what are your views on that? The big export drive, that seems to be part of the major thrust of our economic policy. Export more.
Well, export more, yes, I think that is very important. Export more is very important, but what do you export? Export more of what? And when you look around, when we talk about export more, one is talking about pineapples.
Yes.
One is talking about
the non-traditional
exports, the crafts and so on. That's interesting, but that's not what is going to bring in the big money.
What will bring in the big money?
I mean, textiles. Why should we go and buy, Chinese or Taiwanese made shirts from London? Why can't we make a clean shirt ourselves? I think some people are doing it now.
Do the skills exist?
Oh yes, the skills.
Good quality, competitive shirts.
All you need is a good designer, a good cutter, and we do have them now. And then the machines to stitch the things. What is the problem?
Then we won't be able to sell them in the end, given the nature of the international market.
I think that with good, you see, these are.
If you can't penetrate even with bananas, how are you going to penetrate with shirts and?
In international negotiations, there are trade-offs. I mean, I know we don't have much of bargaining chips, but you get to a point when you listen to international negotiations and there's an impasse. You'll be surprised. Sometimes, for instance, this car wars between Japan and the U.S. At the end of the day, it was resolved. We can also insist that please give us this, give us access to your textile markets if you want us to help you on this.
Interesting.
Yes,
Interesting.
that is what international negotiations is about. It's not just agreeing to everything that is proposed and being a good boy at the international conference.
Being a good boy, I like the way you put it. Finally, Mr. Ashiabor, you say that we must clean up our political act. Tell me what you mean by that, sir.
After 40 years of independence, what is this business of hurling insults at each other? We need to deal with issues. Issues, not personalities. This one has got the wrong nose and that sort of thing.
That's right.
That's not an issue. The thing is that you want to be a politician. Tell us what you want to do for us. You see, why must we vote for you? What kind of philosophy do you have to lift this country out of this? Don't tell us what is wrong with the other individual. This personalizing of issues is completely wrong. There are a whole lot of issues that we can deal with, these sort of issues that we just talked about.
We should be looking
How
at
many
issues.
of these people have you heard? They're just talking about what is wrong with the other individual.
Yes.
That's not the point.
That's what you mean?
Yes.
Mr. Alex Ashiabor, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully next week we can look at some issues. Join us again. Good night.
No question. You can't beat club an outstanding year.
Relax with club. Enjoy its creamy, natural food. For me, club's just right.
My choice. Nothing compares. Ladies, join the club.
Beer the Nuana Club.
What we think of club?
Dig it! Outstanding.
Club, it's good to be number one.